Hello and welcome to the Agile Couple Podcast. I'm Leeanne McManus.
And I'm Kevin McManus.
And we're excited to bring you our next series called Modeling What Matters. In our first episode of this 3-part series, we're actually talking about the few who carry the many, what Price's Law reveals about team performance. So Kevin, let me ask you, could you define for our audience what is Price's Law?
Yeah, so Price's Law basically states that given a population of contributors, that the square root of that total is going to carry 50% of the production. So as an example, if you have a team of 10, say that the square root of that is going to be 3. That means that 3 of the 10 are carrying 50% of the production and the other 7 are the remaining 50%. Now, what's interesting about Price's Law is as you scale that, say you go up to 100 people, now the square root of 100 means that you've got 10 people that are carrying 50% of the productivity and the other 90% are carrying the remaining 50%. So as you go up in scale with regard to that population, you're going to find that there's a smaller number of people that are carrying kind of the lion's share of the load.
But I think we've all seen this, whether we knew that's what it was or not. It is actually a naturally occurring phenomena, right? So can you give us an example of how else we see it?
Yeah, you bet. So one of the examples that they often refer to is like if you have a tomato plant or a series of tomato plants. And let's say that you've got 16 tomato plants, but of that, if you take the square root of 16, that means that 4 of those 16 are going to be producing 50% of the tomatoes. So then you start asking yourself, okay, what's the contributing factors to that? Why are those 4 outperforming the others?
Yeah.
And then you start looking at, okay, well, what's the sunlight ratio? You know, are they getting more sun than the others? Are they getting too much, right? The other ones, the soil content, you know, the nutrients, the water, all of those are contributing factors that help to identify, you know, why those 4 are outproducing the other 12.
So if you were going to look at that, what would those things be? Like tracking that. You have to have awareness of it, number one.
And you
right?
have to be able to measure.
Yeah. So
right?
Measuring it. So you're talking about tomato plants and yielding something in your garden as an example. If we're talking to leaders, it's the same principle that applies though, right? So you have to have awareness of it. You have to learn about what Price's Law is and then start tracking it, right?
Yeah. And I think also because it does occur naturally that in the absence of the awareness, if you never heard of Price's Law before, and now you're getting the exposure to it, now your eyes have been open to, okay, now I'm going to observe things a little bit differently.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you start seeing, oh my gosh, that's kind of accurate. If I look at this team of 12, you know, there's 4 of them that are kind of carrying the rest.
Yeah.
And then it's a matter of what do you do with that information?
Right. So the propagating your best. So we're talking about modeling. This whole series is about modeling the best behavior, modeling whatever that is for performance, whatever you want to model so that you're getting what you're trying to yield, right?
Right.
So how would you propagate that in the real world? So in the tomato scenario, you're going to adjust the sunlight or you're going to enrich the soil, you're going to do those things. What would be different for a team?
Yeah, I think from the team perspective, you know, I've always coached teams to say, okay, if we have somebody that's doing what we want everybody else to do, point to them as the example and say, that's where we need to go.
Yeah.
That's the whole modeling. And there are things that you can do within the teams to be able to kind of increase that capacity and to be able to raise everybody's capabilities. One of the things that we'll talk about, you know, coming up here in a minute is with regard to like pairing. You know, how do you utilize somebody who has really good behaviors and skills and be able to pair them with somebody that could learn from and be able to grow into, you know, that same type of model.
Yeah. So ultimately, as a leader, or really even somebody on the team, you don't just have to be a leader.
Right.
It's the awareness, and then how do you start to recognize these differences? Because
Exactly.
even if I'm working with somebody and I want to be, I want to emulate that myself. There's nothing stopping me from the
Absolutely.
same thing, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Cool. Okay, so Kevin, can you give us some real world examples of where we might see Price's Law?
Yeah, so if you look at more of the creative type of activities or careers like software development, that's a logical creative type of activity, right? And oftentimes you'll find that there are individuals that it just comes kind of very naturally to them, and they're able to have a high degree of productivity. That's not to say that the others are not top performers, because in Price's Law, if you look at a team that you've got, say, 12 people, that they're all very high performers. And if you're in an environment where, for example, on a compensation basis, you have to have a forced ranking where there's a number 1 and there's a number 12, right? In that situation, you could have an absolute, dozen rock stars, but because of that additional constraint, I think more than anything, Price's Law, you need to have an awareness and be able to view the team through that prism, but not be constrained by that, because really what you want to do from a team perspective is how do we raise everybody's capabilities, their skill sets, their capacity, so that as a team, they're able to do more than what they are currently, performing at.
Well, ultimately to do that, let's say you're the manager of that group or the leader of that group, you have to know what is the optimal outcome you're trying to get to. So what is it? What is the bar
Right.
we're trying to set? And so, because I agree with that forced ranking, it's sort of difficult. You may have 5 people who are all equal at the same level,
Right.
but you can't do that with that, right? So it's a disgusting feeling when you have to rank people that way, because it's just not fair and it's not realistic. But as the leader, so you need to, the job is on you then to say, what is it that we're trying to bench
Right.
to? What does that benchmark look like? And then so it doesn't happen overnight. So the awareness of this and starting to see it and figure out who those people are who naturally maybe godly given gifts that they have are able to excel in some way. So software development might be a way, because they have to be creative, but they also have to be logical. You can look at, like if you were setting metrics, you could look at hard and fast metrics, right? Like, so how many pull requests did they do? How many things like that? That's not really going to give you a modeling behavior other than that's a certain cadence that somebody
Right.
works at. That doesn't bring into account quality.
Right.
That doesn't bring in, best practices and standards that they're meeting. Doesn't bring in collaboration with other members, like a lot of those things. So you have got a big job, right, to look at, to figure out what does this model look like that we're trying to do. There are other types of roles that would fit into this. I can think of like a salesperson as an example,
Yeah.
because I know that I've met people who are in sales who are just gifted. They're gifted with people, right? So it's like, they always are, there's a quote, a hidden quote around when you say, don't be the sales guy or whatever. But sometimes those people just have this natural ability to make sales and connect with people. And so there's some really good traits that you could go, that's what we want to benchmark. We want to benchmark how they go out there and they meet new customers, or how they go out there and how they follow up with their customers, or how they have this charisma. I don't know if you can model someone's charisma, but maybe there's things that person could kind of teach somebody else. That's like, connect authentically your own way, but here's the things we're trying to do.
Right.
So you have to figure out what that is for the role, right? So what would you say about some of those? Because it's not hard and fast. It's not like it's not this checkoff list that you're going to have.
No, and I think that's why it's important too. And one of the things that we value a lot is with regard to assessments, being able to have not only awareness about yourself, but also awareness about your team, right? And I think as a leader, you need to be able to, work with your team and being able to identify what are those things that we can objectively measure. So those may be things that are more, in the systematic type. How many commits did you do in software development? How many sales leads did you process in a given day? But then there's those intrinsic ones that are more with regard to the charisma, the behavioral aspect, and those things are harder to teach. And those are the things I think fall real naturally into the modeling.
Yes.
And then it's a matter of you can introduce kind of that pairing. Take a senior, salesperson and match them up with a junior, right? And allow them to observe, that behavior, and then over time, incrementally start allowing them to take more of that lead, and the master or the senior kind of steps back. Now you're in a position where you have modeled that good behavior, but now you're exercising that, with those individuals that may not have that skill set to begin with.
I even think, as you were talking about that, the modeling that way is not even just a senior to a junior. Definitely there's some value in that, and there's a lot to be learned on both sides. But I was even thinking about whether it's a developer example or the sales example, somebody does better. And actually I was thinking about something you recently had to do, and I kind of put you under pressure for this scenario where it's not your natural talent to think on your feet when you're in front of a room, right? And people are looking at you. But other people flourish that way, right? Is that something you can help model? Well, maybe, because some people maybe just need to know, I need to practice it so many times. I need to be comfortable with it, where somebody else doesn't get stressed about that sort of thing at all. So there's some hidden qualities that people have that maybe you can't model, but you can work your way towards them.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's part of the modeling is also being able to push out of the comfort zones. And I think that is something that I've learned recently in that scenario, which is, it's not a matter of I can't do it. I do not like that.
Yeah.
And it's really kind of on the spot. You're trying to do something. You got 50 people
and it's
watching,
unpredictable.
And it's unpredictable, right?
Yeah.
And in those situations, it just kind of amped up the anxiety. But I've done it twice, and now I'm going to be doing it 2 more times this week. And I've got a much higher degree of confidence because I've been there, done that. It's not the mystery that it was before. And that's where sometimes we as individuals just need to get out of our own way. And rather than putting the barrier up, expecting the worst, is just put yourself in a position to be successful. And it may not be perfect, but guess what? You've grown through that, and you've been able to, overcome that anxiety. And once again, if you have somebody that's kind of laying down a good model to practice, and I had that benefit.
That's what I was just thinking.
I was able to watch, the other developer the night before kind of go through it. And it's like, oh, okay, now I've got the path.
Yes.
And then that fed into, how I could go about doing my demonstration.
There is a bit of imposter syndrome that can enter with this, though.
Absolutely.
Because so we are talking about modeling, modeling behavior or modeling practices or whatever that is. You cannot be somebody else.
Right.
So that should not be confused. So as the leader, you can't have expectations that Kevin did this, so I should expect Steve and Sally to do this.
Right.
No, but Steve and Sally need to know what they're aiming for, what the expectations are. You give them whatever they need to get there in their way.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about, but it's not cookie cutter. You are not like the other facilitator.
Right.
You have the same skill set, but very different personality, very different, all of those assessment things that come into play.
Yeah.
That it's different. You can't be that person.
Right. Well, and I think one of the interesting, and this is kind of at the higher level that I've observed over my career, because you look at, especially in technology and software developers, right? It's not cookie cutter. Every person is unique in their experiences, their skill set, the way that they go about solving problems. And there's an industrial age mindset, which is coming out of the factory, where it's like everybody is doing the same thing. And that's not what you do like in software development. So you have to be able to adapt and recognize the domain and the environment that you're in, that you're not just cogs in the wheel. That's like when I worked for a very large IT organization back at the end of the 90s, early 2000s, and there's like 150,000 of us. And you truly become kind of a number and a cog in the wheel. And they were always referring to resources, right? This is just a pet peeve of mine. I've shared this with countless people, over my career, but I'll never refer to a person as a resource.
Yeah.
And the reason being is it's, one, dehumanizing, and secondly, it reinforces a language that is not applicable to who that person is as an individual.
It sounds like you're plug and play. Like you all come, like a software engineer is a software engineer is a software engineer.
Yeah.
That's not true.
Yeah.
Just like a salesperson is not typical of the next salesperson.
Exactly.
They bring different expertise, different personalities, different creative thinking, different critical thinking. All of those things come into play.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think if we pull the conversation back to Price's Law, yes, there are going to be some people that are naturally going to be more productive. But as a leader of a team, regardless of the domain, is recognizing those positive characteristics and that productivity and looking at how can I start, bringing everybody else up to a higher level. They may never achieve,
Right.
the same level as the square root group. But if you're able to make incremental progress and see everybody grow, that means that you've increased the capacity and the capability of the teams, which is really the important
Yes,
part.
I think that is actually it. So while Price's Law is really interesting and it's something we should aim for, I think it's more about moving the metric up, right?
is.
So collectively, because I was even thinking we're going to talk later in some of our other series about different assessments, and one of those being the widget, right? With the Working Genius under Patrick Lencioni's and the table group. But each person has some naturally given talents and genius that they work in. And I was thinking about, let's say, a sales situation like that. Somebody like you, who's strong in enablement, is not going to be like somebody who's out there and has the tenacity necessarily.
Right.
Or that doesn't mean that you can't, that the whole group would have an effect. If you're all in the right place, you actually can raise the bar of the whole group.
Absolutely.
Right.
And I think the important part there as well is once you have that awareness of where everybody's strengths are, or their genius, or however you want to term it, now it's a matter of, now you have that awareness so that as you're making decisions about who should be working in what area, you've just got a higher degree of understanding of what's going to allow them to be successful, which in turn is going to allow the project to be successful.
Yeah, because actually, if you think about what we're saying is, let's say I lead a department and there's another department in the organization. Now Price's Law may be between department, right? Instead of the people per se. So if we're trying to make sure that we're raising revenue or whatever that is, or increasing our service capacity or whatever the metric is, we could look at it that way. It's like we want to be the one at the top level Price's Law in the organization.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good. Actually, we were talking about creatively, like creative positions is what I'm trying to say. You had mentioned something earlier when we were offline about if this is not a creative thing and you had, like, let's go back to the farming thing, and you had something that was just routine. What was your example of that? Because it's predictable and different then.
Yeah. So for anybody who is either seen on TV or lives in the Midwest or any type of agricultural situation, if you're looking at combines that are out there harvesting grain, you have like 3 or 4 of them that are running kind of in parallel. There's not one that's outperforming the other, right? So Price's Law doesn't necessarily mean that, that one combine is going to be outperforming the other. No, you have to look at the context of how you apply these different things. Just like Pareto's, law as opposed to Price's Law, it depends upon the activity that's being, that's being done, that you can use some of these things to be able to kind of assess and determine what do we want to be measuring as far as our metrics are concerned.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So Pareto's principle is often referred to as the 80-20 rule, but it's basically 80% does 20 or basically results in 20% of whatever it is. It could be, 20% of our customers give us 80% of our profit, or whatever that is. But go ahead.
That's a really good point too, because I've worked for an organization before where they're taking in like premiums, right? And I think one of the things that I had observed with one of our groups that interacted directly with the clients is they were treating every one of those clients exactly the same. So you may have somebody that's contributing $100 versus somebody who's contributing $1 million. You need to be able to have the discernment to recognize that those need to be handled in a little bit different. That's not to say that you don't, provide the best service for the person who's giving you $100. That's not the point. But you can't normalize that, right?
Yeah.
Because you need to be able to recognize, same thing. You've got 20% of your clientele that's carrying 80% of your revenue. That requires a different set of decisions.
Well, I've had many friends are brokers in real estate, and I've had some different ways of explaining it. But I remember, I think it was my cousin actually a long time ago who dealt with very high end real estate. And I remember asking her, why are they calling you? Because she wasn't even working that day or whatever. And she's like, because they all think I'm the one that handles it. Like they could all do it. But we ended up talking about that. And she's like, obviously you make more money if you've got million plus real estate versus a $300,000 real estate, but it's the same amount of work expended. Actually, I had another real estate person who said the lower ones are actually higher maintenance because they're new, they're scared, they're not used to doing that, they're not used to the money kind of interchanging and all of that. So it's actually more work to do something that doesn't yield the same amount.
Yeah.
So it happens all over in what we do.
Yep,
right?
absolutely.
Okay, cool. So let's transition a little bit to talk about what are some of the implications that might happen to teams, right? So some of the things you might not realize, or if you're focused on the end target, what are some things that we might see show up?
Yeah, so I think on the positive side, you can have very high performance and success, within the team. And I think that's, as a leader, what you need to be doing is focusing on how do we do that, at that team level. And obviously, if you've got the square root group, can help drive that success. But I think on the flip side of it, some of the things that you need to be aware of is that can also lead to burnout. Either burnout on that core group that is the high performers, they feel like they have to take that load on. It could also cause burnout by those that don't feel like they're at that same level. They're constantly feeling like they're going to try to catch up. And that's, from a leadership perspective, you need to have that awareness of the teams to make sure that you're addressing both of those, potential situations. Also, there's a perception of inequality, right?
Yes.
And that perception can exist, within the team. That is like, why is this person getting, more of the work versus, me, or, how does my performance stack up, to the rest? Or you can have those that are high performers. That's like, okay, it's easier for me just to do the work than wait on somebody else.
That's a true statement. Yes.
And that's where you have to change that mindset. And as a leader, be able to work with them to understand that, hey, you're in a position that you've got capabilities that you can help others grow into that area. I've had situations like when I've been teaching classes. The classic one was I was teaching like this introduction to Java, and I had one developer who was kind of sitting in the back. I can tell that it's like we're starting with the fundamentals.
He's
and
bored.
He's bored, right? That's one of those strategies that facilitators and trainers use, is incorporate them into the learning.
Yeah.
So I went and had a conversation with him and said, hey, the guy sitting next to you, such and such, is struggling. Would you mind? I know that you've got a pretty good handle on this. Would you mind helping him, through these exercises as well? And what was interesting is the feedback that I'd gotten from him at the end of the week was for those things that he thought he really understood. When he started explaining to somebody else, he realized, I don't know this quite as well as I thought. So there was this epiphany that, his understanding was not as great as what he had originally, thought, which is great. But what that also allowed me to do from a instructional standpoint is be able to leverage and scale, so I'm not the only one that's providing that help. And some of the best learning, as we found,
Obviously, yeah.
Comes when the teams have the ability to interact in their pairs, in the team, within the classroom, and being able to have that level of interaction and be able to scale that, as well.
Well, so I think, because we're going to talk about T shape or M shape or W shape. There's all these different shapes that you can talk about, like where's your depth and your breadth as far as your skill set and what you bring to the table. But so I think cross training is really important, and cross pollinating is really important. And part of it is, it's sort of that. It's like you might be the best developer as far as like kicking out some killer code. That doesn't mean you're the best overall developer, right? There's a lot of things that you're kind of siloed in your thinking what you do, and you do it by yourself. But let's enrich what you know and what you bring to the table by learning with other people. And that's one of the great ways, is what you were just talking about. So whether it's you had somebody come in and kind of help you assist somebody, which is really kind of pairing with them and helping to guide them, or like mobbing, or what else would you give as guidance that way?
Well, I think those are two very, powerful aspects. The pairing, I'm a big fan of pairing, because once again, what it does is it gives a different perspective, that when you're looking at a problem, when you've got two people working on it, it's that third mind concept, right? That mastermind that's created. The T, shape, skill set, where you've got that breadth as well as depth in a area. And that's where, as a leader, it's really important for you to understand what your team's capabilities are, so that you can take these different puzzle pieces in your team and be able to combine them in a way where they're complementary, to one another.
Well,
yeah, so those are...
You can't really model, like we're talking about, we're trying to talk in this series about modeling what you're trying to reach, like to make a template, right? The best that you can of people. But you can't do that if you don't have, Like if you have somebody that's a developer or the best salesperson and they just stay going their way, but there's no cross-pollinating, they might stay good at that one thing, but we're trying to enrich the whole group, right? So you have to kind of do it in different ways. And I think building empathy in other positions and when I say cross-pollinate, I just mean that they live a day in the other shoes, or they have to take on some of these other responsibilities. So they have a bigger picture of what we're trying to reach.
Right.
It's not just you're really good at closing the sales. Maybe you need to be part of the pre-sales, maybe part of the whole life cycle. Maybe you need to go and hand off to the team that you're selling about.
Right.
So you understand what that looks like on the other side when you make all these commitments.
Right.
Yeah, you're getting paid great, but somebody else might be suffering in the process. So how do we model the ultimate picture of what we're trying to reach? Right.
Yeah. And I think that empathy is a big component there. You know, like you said, you may have somebody who's in sales that's like, I'm going to go out and I'm going to knock, these 5 deals out of the park, but you've made commitments that now your team is on the hook to deliver. And if you don't have an understanding of what that takes, then that builds animosity and that builds a lot of negativity. And if you just take the time to have that communication, like we talk about all the time, communication, the collaboration, having that understanding of, when it leaves my desk, my output is the next part. It's the input to the next group. How does that handoff occur, and what are the consequences? What are the benefits of that? And if you have that understanding, that empathy, you make far better decisions as a team.
Well, and if you're in leadership too, and you're looking at, how do we motivate? Because some people are motivated by money, others are motivated by different things, right? But it just talk about, like, from a financial perspective, I believe in pay for performance. And so part of that pay for performance model that I would put together wouldn't be the siloed, like, you've brought this to the table. It'd be more of like, where's the team at, and how are we all working together, and how are we all enriched, and how are we all cross-pollinating? So I would make that specifically something so that there's intention behind them working with other people and filling the other shoes and learning the whole cycle, or whatever it is.
There's an incentive that you have to instill that I don't want to call it lazy. It's not, but it's one of those situations that you need to be able to have expertise, but you also need to be able to focus on what's the team's overall success.
Right. Yeah. So, that's good. So the T shape, can you just talk about that? Because I said MWT, just give a simple T, so for people in case they don't know what that means.
Yeah, so for a T skill set, maybe what we're talking about is, if you use the example of a software developer, so I always go back to this because that's my life. But if you look at a software developer, maybe you have somebody that's really good at front-end development. So some of the skill sets like HTML and CSS and JavaScript and React and all the frameworks that go onto front end, maybe that's where they've got a lot of depth. They may have some understanding of the back end, or they may have a little bit of understanding of the database, but that's not their sweet spot. So those are going to be more on those shallower ends. So that's going to be the broader topics, and your depth is going to be more of a specialty.
So the T, the leg of the T is the depth.
Yes.
The cross of the T across the top would be the breadth.
Correct.
So it might even be other things, right? So do you understand Agile? Are you really good at customer whatever? Like, it's not just technical.
No,
right?
not at all.
Yeah.
Whatever the characteristics or whatever the measurements are that you're using, you can use that to develop that T.
Because actually, if you think about it, even from a developer standpoint, having somebody who's got some experience where they've interacted in doing a showcase, or in, like, some of those things are really helpful on a team that they can start to develop. So when I say M, that just means that we've got more than one leg.
Yeah.
So and the more seasoned you are in your career, you usually aren't beyond a T, right? So you might have, for a long time I was a front end developer, but now I'm deep into whatever. So you can have different areas where you've got a lot of depth, and then you've got different breadth levels that you've got going on.
Yep.
So, but ultimately, we're trying to build the team up, the company up, whatever it is we're trying to do. And we want to model the best behavior, because even the modeling could go back to, we talk a lot about culture. Maybe we're going to model that.
Right.
So who are the ones that are always I'll test out what this new thing is we want to do as an organization. I'll be your champion for this. Those can be things that we're talking about. It's not just technical specific position things, right? It's like, who are we going to use that's going to, these words anymore have effect on people, but evangelize or champion or ambassador, like those things. Who are we going to use that really is going to model the thing that we're trying to get to? So think about it beyond just the specific scope of a position. It's really kind of anything you're trying to move the meter on,
Right.
I think, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So do you have any final thoughts before we close this out?
No, I think we've covered quite a bit of ground on this. So no, I think I'm good.
Well, and this also, we are the agile couple, right? So we truly do live and breathe kind of working in an agile way and under the values and principles of agile. But really most of the stuff that we're focusing on is team centric for any team, I think. So even a lot of times we might say certain things like we didn't talk about velocity. We didn't talk about these things because I don't want it to get pigeonholed or to exclude people from the audience, because this stuff is really naturally occurring everywhere.
It is.
And once you can see what the problem is, or you learn about some of these things, you can start to apply it across the board. So exciting. So we are going to end this episode, but we're excited for the next episode in this same series. And our next episode is Leading Loudly Without Saying a Word, the Power of Behavior Modeling. So we're going to extend more on this and do it. And this will be a better area for you because I'm definitely a sharer and I talk a lot and you're a little more of an observer, right? And quieter. So thank you. Thanks for joining us and we hope to see you soon.
Yeah. Thank you.